Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Online Education Leadership Forum Masterclass for Educators on Fostering Emotional Intelligence with David Adams. Thank you so much for investing your time with us on a weekday. My name is Aryan Salman and I'm the President of Global Citizenship Foundation. Today, I have with me the amazing David Adams. He is the author of the Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence and is the Senior Director of Strategy at the Urban Assembly, a group of 23 public middle and high schools in the United States. David has published multiple academic papers around the relationship of social emotional competence and students' academic and behavioral outcomes. Additionally, he serves on the board of directors of CASEL, a leading organization fostering social emotional learning. Also, David is a civil affairs officer in the Army Reserve, and he holds a master's in education in educational psychology from Fordham University. I'm thrilled and excited to welcome him to lead this masterclass for educators on fostering emotional intelligence. Please do not forget to fill the feedback form to request your certificate of participation and also receive a complimentary copy of the masterclass handout document prepared by David. We are also streaming the live broadcast of this masterclass on our website and on our social media channels for the benefit of those who are not able to attend this session. Please subscribe to our social media channels and help us with your feedback and suggestions so that we can improve the way we serve you and boost our efforts of advancing the discourse on transforming education for human flourishing. As you know, we continue to live in increasingly challenging and uncertain times with enormous changes and disruptions to our lives and our professions. It is a moment for us to assume active global citizenship and support those in need. Having said that, I would also like to take this moment to mark a minute of silence for those who have lost their lives to the pandemic and the grieving individuals and families, and in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement in the US and around the world. Thank you. Now we ring the bell to thank and honor the healthcare workers, our educators, and others on the front line who are carrying out essential roles selflessly, continuing their day-to-day duties inside and outside the home in support of us all. Thank you. The Online Education Leadership Forum was started with the objective to provide a platform for educational leaders to shape, empower, influence, and advance the discourse on, and be a springboard aiding action towards and helping school leaders transform education for human flourishing. Now, before we start the session, I want to give you a bit of information about David's book, The Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence. David's book, like its title, is a practical guide that intends to empower educators to become emotionally intelligent and to foster emotional intelligence skills within and beyond the classrooms. This book helps educators in learning how to map emotions, match emotions, understand the meaning of emotions, and move emotions, which are the four skills of emotional intelligence based on the original scientific theory of emotional intelligence by psychologists John Mayer and Peter Salovey. With these skills, you can create a more positive school culture and classroom climate, be it more be it that you become a more effective educator or a better colleague within the school ecosystem. The book addresses difficult challenges that every educator faces and provides them, that is you, with a set of emotional intelligence blueprints to successfully address these challenges. And it also teaches you how to build your own blueprints. So this book is written by or authored by David Caruso, Lisa Reese, and David Adams. So thank you so much. Now I yield the floor to David.
Arian, thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today. And we're going to get into some of these ideas of emotional intelligence. I want to thank you and your organization for hosting me today. Thank you for what the Global Citizens Foundation does on behalf of education for kids across the world. Thank you for investing in the time and the space to help develop the social and emotional competencies so that we all have the opportunity to participate in the world. So we're going to get started today. I'm going to share my screen. So great. So I'm very excited today to be here with you all. I'm David Adams, Senior Director of Strategy at the Urban Assembly. And I'm going to talk to you today about fostering emotional intelligence. Before we get started, let's talk a little bit about our objectives. So we have a number of objectives here today. The first objective that we have is that we want to have our participants share an understanding of the role of emotions and the role that the emotions play in facilitating educational outcomes. The second objective that you guys will take part in is that you will be able to apply emotional intelligence concepts to educational scenarios. All right, let's take a look at our agenda. So we're going to start off with some introductions. We're going to get into the chat. I'm going to learn a little bit about you guys, where you're from, what do you do. Then we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence theory. We're going to briefly touch upon sustainable development goals, and then we're going to apply these ideas to a blueprint example. Lastly, we're going to move to question and answering, where I'll have an opportunity to answer your questions based on the things that we talked about today. So let's get started. In the chat, what I'd like you guys to do is enter your name, location, and title so we know a little bit about each other and we know where you're from. As Arian mentioned, I am the Senior Director of Strategy at the Urban Assembly. I recently was the Director of Social and Emotional Learning. I have 18 years in the Army Reserve, currently a Civil Affairs Officer, 2 children, Elijah and Isaiah Adams, and married for 10 years. And the work that the Urban Assembly does is that we develop and produce innovation within the public education system in order to scale it at large. So what we're going to do now is you guys are going to tell me a little bit about yourselves, where you're from, what do you do, and what's your name. So use the chat and we'll take some time to learn each other. All right, so we have Clementine from Rwanda, welcome. Anna from Ireland, welcome. Deeprick, who's a primary teacher. Daniel from Rwanda, welcome. Sheila from India, welcome. Saida from Saudi Arabia, welcome. We have Samita from Delhi, India, who's a teacher at an international school. We have Yvonne from Rwanda, welcome, welcome. Jean-Baptiste from Rwanda, welcome. Papa Adasek from Dakar, welcome. We have Sapna, who's an education consultant from India, welcome. We're going to take about 4 or 5 more. Anuja, a special educator and counselor from India. Rukaka Jones from Rwanda, welcome, welcome. Angelica Lopez from Colombia, welcome, Angelica. Dr. Tiwari from India, welcome. Deepti, a teacher from Delhi, welcome. So I know there are some more people on, but we're gonna take your time in the chat, continue to introduce yourselves, where you're from, what you do, welcome. A little bit about myself, David Adams. I am Senior Director of the Strategy at Urban Assembly. Previous to this position, you can see on my right, I worked as the Social and Emotional Learning Coordinator for District 75, which is our special education district in New York City. I've worked internationally in schools in England as a research lab intern at the Health University, at Yale University's Health, Emotion, and Behavior Lab. And I currently work at the Urban Assembly as the Senior Director of Strategy. If you can look on the left-hand side, my co-authors here are Dr. David Caruso, who is the co-founder of the Emotional Intelligence Skills Group. He's a senior advisor to the Dean of Yale College. He works at Yale currently, and he is the author of the Anchors of Emotional Intelligence from the Ruler Program. My other co-author is Lisa T. Reese. She's an experienced leader, coach, and trainer with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Service, and has worked as an emotional intelligence coach to many, many leaders across the country. So these are the people who co-authored the book with me. And I'm very excited to talk to you today about what it means to develop emotional intelligence skills and how we can do that for our students. Before we get there, I want to talk to you about the UN Development Goals, and specifically about UN Development Goal 4.7. By 2030, we want to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity and culture's contribution to sustainable development. And so what does this look like today? Right? We know that COVID has had worldwide implications. Across the world, we have students who are now out of school. And as we work to reopen, based on the data that we have with regards to the virus's spread, we need to understand how COVID has impacted what we're doing today. And so one of the things that we want to talk about is that even though 90% of all students are out of school or have been out of school in the context of COVID, the work of emotional intelligence will ensure that when students come back into school, they will do so in a way that promotes their learning so that our sustainable development goal around quality education can be reached and that we can repair the loss of learning and the loss of social activities for our young people today. So today's masterclass is on emotional intelligence. Before we get into understanding what emotional intelligence is, the first thing for us to understand is what is intelligence overall. So there are two big ideas with regards to understanding what intelligence is. You have the classic idea, which is represented by Spearman's G, a global ability, a general ability to learn and adapt to the environment. It is the general ability to learn and adapt to the environment. And this general ability is represented psychometrically with Spearman's G, this global understanding of what education is. A newer definition of education, still grounded in Spearman's G in this overall space, is the ability to operate in problem space. The ability to operate in problem space. And this happens in two ways. First is in a well-defined problem space, when there are very clear solutions to an answer. So on your bottom left-hand side, you'll see what a well-defined problem space looks like. You'll see that there are people putting puzzle pieces together and integrating an overall sense of that problem. Here is the problem, puzzle piece, here's a solution, effective approach. Now we're going to move to the right where we see ill-defined problems, divergent thinking opportunities and problem spaces. In ill-defined problems, you have problem spaces that don't have clear boundaries. They're not interlocking pieces. They're overall spaces in which there are multiple approaches to solve that problem effectively. The importance for this in 2020, the concept of problem space, is as we move into a more automated world, the advantages that human beings will bring to bear are going to be focused on operating in ill-defined problem spaces. in a cognitive and a social and emotional way in order to solve problems that can't be replicated by computers. So going back to the Sustainable Development Goal, the type of education that our young people will need in 2020 in order to prepare them for the future at hand will be one that allows them to operate effectively in problem space with ill-defined goals, where young people are working in collaboration with each other in order to solve problems. So now we have a little bit of a sense of what intelligence is. Let's look and understand what emotions are. So contrary to popular belief, there are many different definitions, or there are competing definitions of the purpose of emotions. So what I've done here is I've laid down the three most important things that emotions do, and then we're going to talk about the theories of what emotions are. So the first thing that emotions do is they govern and signal motivated responses to situations. What does that mean? So to govern means to control. It means to operate in conjunction with. So our responses are controlled or operate in conjunction with our emotions. The second thing emotions do is they signal, they give us information about a situation. So when we put that together, emotions govern, they prompt, they control, they manage our responses to a situation, they motivate, but they also give us information that allows us to motivate ourselves about situations. The next thing emotions do more specifically in the context of relationships is that emotions are judgments about the extent that current situations are in line with the goals that we are trying to accomplish. So emotions are feedback systems. They allow us to understand how well this current situation is in line with what we're trying to do, our goals. And so if you put these three things together, what you understand is that whether you're focusing on governing and motivating or receiving feedback, emotions are information. So if you look below, you'll see the three categories of emotions in terms of theories around the importance of how emotions work. The first category focuses on responses within the body that cause emotion. All right, so the first theory of emotions in terms of why emotions exist is that emotions come out of our body. They are physiological, and that's where they exist, and that's why they're important. The next idea of emotion is that they're brain-based, that even though we can feel them in our body, they're actually generated from our brains first. The last concept of emotions and in terms of where they come from is that they're cognitive-based. This is the cognitive appraisal version of emotional theory, that we understand our emotions based on what we think about them. The critique here is that a heart racing, sweaty palms can either be excited if you are on a roller coaster, or can be anxious if you are giving your first talk. It's the actual cognitive appraisal that defines the emotion rather than the physiological responses of the emotions themselves. Again, these are three competing theories. And today we're going to talk less about why emotions happen and talk more about the information that emotions give us and how we use that information to solve problems. So we started out with intelligence. We talked about intelligence being a general ability to learn and solve problems. And then we introduced this notion of problem space, things being well-defined problem spaces in which there are clear answers to the solutions to the answers, and ill-defined problem spaces in which multiple approaches could provide potential solutions to answers. Then we talked about emotions. We said emotions govern us in terms of they motivate us towards action, but they also are feedback loops in relationships. They give us a sense of how well the context is meeting our goals. So we put these two things together, intelligence and emotion, we come up with a theory of emotional intelligence as articulated by Mayer Salovey and my co-author, Dr. David Caruso, in 2008, their recent article, and initially in 1997 in their article defining the theory itself. Emotional intelligence includes the ability to engage in sophisticated information processing about one's own and others' emotions, and the ability to use this information as a guide to thinking and behavior. That is, individuals high in emotional intelligence pay attention to, use, understand, and manage emotions. And these skills serve as adaptive functions that potentially benefit themselves and others. So you can see here how the theory of intelligence, what intelligence is, comes to play in the concept of emotional intelligence. This idea of adaptive functioning, that we use emotional information in order to maximize our adaptive functioning. Individuals high in emotional intelligence are able to perceive, use, understand, and manage these emotions in ways that benefit themselves in order to solve problems. So you can see here at the bottom of the page, I have a picture of Lieutenant Commander Data. If anybody is a Star Wars fan, you can recall that Lieutenant Commander Data spent his entire life trying to understand what humanity is. And one of the key pieces of humanity that he sought to understand was the way that we use emotions to solve problems or to help understand each other. So one way to think about emotional intelligence is thinking about Lieutenant Commander Data, who was an android. He was a machine who spent his time seeking to incorporate emotional data into his problem-solving abilities. And that's what we do when we're emotionally intelligent. We're able to incorporate emotional data into our problem-solving abilities, allowing us to be more adaptive and potentially benefit ourselves and others. So now that we have a definition of emotional intelligence, let's take a minute to think about what emotional intelligence looks like in terms of skills. Again, in our book, The Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence, we're using the ability model of emotional intelligence. And it's important to understand that the ability model of emotional intelligence was the original model put out by Mayer and Salovey in 1997 as they were describing emotion as a part of the intelligence framework that allowed us to solve problems. So within our book, we have established and drawn from this tradition to talk about 4 abilities. And again, this is from the original model. It's simple, but complicated to do every day. So we talk about the ability to perceive emotion, to be able to see it, to understand it in ourselves and others. We talk about the ability to facilitate emotion, understand how emotion impacts the tasks that we're trying to accomplish, and match our emotional state to the outcomes that we're looking to achieve. Understand emotions, understand how emotions relate to each other, how they move through time, what causes emotions, how they translate and change over time. And lastly, manage emotions. How we manage ourselves, how we regulate our emotions in order to meet our goals. Each ability has its own characteristics, the ability to perceive, facilitate, understand, and manage. And they all work together to form emotional intelligence. Now, in our book, we take each of these concepts and we use a little bit more memorable labels. So instead of perceive, we talk about map. Instead of facilitate, we talk about matching. Instead of understand, we talk about meaning. And instead of manage, we talk about move. But it's important to recognize that even though we use slightly different terminology for better retention, these are the same original skills and abilities that are reflected in the Mayer-Caruso model. So, what are these abilities? And how do we use them to solve problems? The first of these abilities is called mapping emotions. Mapping emotions is the ability to understand what I am feeling and what others are feeling. If you recall back to the three theories of the purpose of emotions, one of these theories said that emotions exist in the context of our ability to understand them in our brains. So as we understand our emotions, as we give meaning to our emotions, the purpose of emotions becomes clear. And if you look at mapping emotions, that idea is reflected in the skill and ability. So what you see in front of you is called the mood map. This was developed by Dr. David Caruso and is now called the mood meter in the context of Dr. Mark Brackett's work at the Ruler Lab and the Center for Emotional Intelligence at Yale. And this tool allows us to understand how we are feeling, which gives us a sense of our emotional state. I'll show you how to use it. On your left-hand side, you'll see the pleasant, you see feelings. And feelings are how pleasant we are or unpleasant we are. On the bottom, you'll see energy. This is the intensity of the feelings, from low to high. So when you put these things together, it gives our brain the ability to really think about how we are feeling and start to recognize how others are feeling. These labels are what we're going to call emotion words. So if we look at this map and think about a feeling that is high in intensity, but low in pleasantness, that would put us in the bottom right, or the red section. Feeling words that describe this sense are things like anger, anxiety, frustration. And you can imagine enraged would be the highest amount of intensity as well as the lowest amount of pleasantness. Let's move over to the top right. If we're looking here, we're thinking about feelings that are pleasant, but also high in energy. Now, if you have children like I do, you're very well acquainted with this quadrant. These are feeling like joyful, excited. If you're thinking the top pleasantness, number 10, and the top level of intensity or energy, you're thinking ecstatic. We don't always need to be in that quadrant of happiness, ecstatic. Let's look over to the left and understand what the feeling words that would describe that state. Again, here you're looking at feelings that are still pleasant, but a little bit lower in energy. Things like content, calm, relaxed. And lastly, if you're feeling low in unpleasantness and low in energy, the words that describe those feeling states are focused on things like sad, depressed, unhappy. Why is it so important to map our emotions? Going back to our original understanding of what emotions are, being clear about how you're feeling gives us a sense of the environment around us. In order to pull out the right type of information from our emotional state, one of the things that we need to be able to do is accurately understand and map how we're actually feeling. So our emotional state is strongly related to our ability to interpret our body and then label that with an emotion word that gives us insight into how we are feeling. So this ability is very important. Recognizing the emotion in the information in our emotions has a lot to do with developing an emotional vocabulary that allows us to understand our feelings of pleasantness and unpleasantness and the intensity of those feelings in an accurate way so that we are getting the appropriate information from our emotional states in order to solve problems. Let's move on from mapping emotions to matching emotions. So we talked about the Mayer and Salovey model of emotional intelligence being not just about knowing what you're feeling and understanding the feeling of others, but being able to use those feelings in order to facilitate problem solving and achieve our goals. This notion of adaptive, using our emotions to pursue adaptive problem solving, is important to understand when thinking about what this means for education. So let's look at some key pieces here. It turns out that different emotional states facilitate different kinds of outcomes for ourselves and for others. Going back to the yellow quadrant, top right, happiness tends to facilitate thinking around creativity. Lesson planning, for example, if you're looking to be creative, has a lot to do with your emotional state. We all know that generating enthusiasm as an educator is really important. And the enthusiasm we generate is going to be shared by our students. So think about how I move myself into a place that I know will facilitate outcomes for young people. But again, we don't always have to be happy. Let's look at our bottom right quadrant, the red quadrant, which is low unpleasantness, but high energy. Anger allows us to fight injustice and motivates us. It's effective for critical analysis. When you're looking at something and you want to give the best quality feedback, being really happy may not be the emotional state that allows you to access those skills in the most effective manner. So think about being in that bottom right quadrant, and being constructive in that space is going to be one of the skills and abilities of emotional intelligence as well. Now let's look at the quadrant to the left. This is feeling unpleasant and having low energy. This sadness gives us a focus on details. When we're in this state, it allows us to really engage in minutia. So if you're giving feedback and focusing on small pieces, you might want to think about how your emotional state is low energy and slightly unpleasant. And then lastly, looking at feeling pleasant, but with a low emotional state. And this is a quadrant that's effective for self-reflection. Running around like feeling ecstatic and exciting may not get you to the place that you need to when you're reflecting on your own strengths and challenges or something that you did. And again, this may be another place that allows you to bring people in, create consensus in order to gain agreement. So this match skill is very important for us as educators, because it allows us to understand what are we trying to accomplish in this moment in our lesson, in this space in instruction. We need to think, what is the goal that I have for me and my students? And how is my emotional state helping facilitate that goal or hindering it? And when we go through that review, it allows us to do this next skill. It allows us to gain meaning. So emotional meaning is about understanding how emotions work, how they move throughout ourselves over time. We know, for example, that anxiety can often turn to frustration. Frustration can often turn to anger. Being aware of your emotions gives you the ability to label that. Matching your emotions is about establishing your goal and then using your emotions to move you towards that goal while taking feedback from the environment. Your emotional meaning is the ability to understand, why am I feeling what I am feeling? And is it helping me to meet my goal? So let's look about a couple of things that reflect this. First, emotions have a general cause across the world. So feeling frustrated is generally associated with getting blocked from getting something that you want or value. Words that describe that feeling are irritated, annoyed, frustrated, angry, engaged. And you'll notice there are different levels of intensity based on the quality of the energy in those words. Annoyed is lower energy than angry. Irritated is slightly lower energy than annoyed. And you may think these distinctions don't have any meaning, but in fact, being able to identify these small gradients of energy gives us a great deal of ability to manage our emotions, which we're going to talk about next, and communicate effectively. Disgust is related to your values being violated or offended. So understanding why and when you feel disgusted gives you a sense of information around the environment. It gives you feedback as to how you're operating with the environment at the moment in the context of what you're trying to accomplish. Now, here are some words that reflect that: distasteful, objectionable, disgusted, loathsome. And again, the energy to these words are differentiated. Loathsome has a different energy level than distasteful. And then lastly, happiness is when you gain something of value. There's many different contexts for happiness and energy words to describe this as well. A lower space of happiness is feeling content, pleased. A slightly higher energy towards happiness is delighted. When we understand the meaning of our emotions, we're able to interrogate our emotional response for information, which gives us the ability to problem solve for ourselves and others effectively. Again, emotional intelligence is about applying the emotional skills in order to solve problems in ourselves and to support and facilitate problem solving in others. This brings us to our last skill: move, or managing your emotions. When we move or manage our emotions, we are able to align our emotions to the goal that we are trying to accomplish. This is not about suppressing your emotions. It's not about thinking that your emotions are good or bad. It's about taking the information from your emotions and then using that information to align yourself to your goal. The picture you see below has inputs, which is your emotions, a process, which is how you manage your emotions. And an important piece here, there's many different strategies to manage your emotions. There are active strategies like taking a walk, doing exercise. There are cognitive strategies like cognitive reappraisal, where we think about how we are feeling and then think about how we want to feel, or whether that emotional strategy makes sense. And when we work with our young people and ourselves to manage our emotions, it's about using processes that are healthy and that allows us to meet our goals. So our inputs are the environment. What is happening in the environment? These inputs give us information. We then manage our emotions, which is that information, using active strategies, cognitive strategies, passive strategies. And that output is in a managed or behavior that is in line with our goals. So let me just say that one last time. We have inputs, which is the environment, and our emotional information that we get from that environment. Something happens. There's a stimulus. Based on that input, we engage in mapping. How are we feeling? Matching. What do we want to accomplish? We derive meaning. Why do I feel the way we do? And then we take a moment to manage, using our emotional regulation strategies to maximize our outputs, which is what we're trying to accomplish in that space. Now, it's important to understand that many people, especially young people or people who have not experienced training in emotional intelligence, have a very difficult time at aligning goals, what I'm trying to accomplish, to feelings, what are my emotions telling me about my environment. And so one of the most important things that we're going to talk about as we move into how we apply these things to the problem-solving framework used in the blueprint is operating in a world with a sense of intentionality. What am I trying to accomplish in this situation or scenario? And how does what I'm trying to accomplish align to my emotional state? So now that we've gone through the main strategies, main ability model of emotional intelligence, what we're going to do now is we're going to move to applying this ability model into a situation on problem solving in the context of education. So in our book, we go through scenarios. And in the scenarios, we have the ability to apply these concepts of move, match, meaning, and manage to specific situations that allow us to work through these concepts and abilities in real time. So let's go through one of these and see what you guys think. This scenario reflects a teacher with an average level of emotional intelligence skill. Here's the background. We had a complete transition to online learning. Are you kidding me? This is so stressful. My principal met with us today, and we are supposed to plan and deliver online lessons starting in 1 week. I'm pretty sure my teacher education course did not cover this. It's so hard to motivate students in real life. Now I have to do it online? How am I supposed to pay attention to this training when I'm so stressed out? I need to figure out some strategies, not only on how to shift to online learning, but also my emotions around it. So in the chat, what I want you guys to do is I want you to think about shifting in your teaching and whether or not this has ever happened to anybody in your teaching career. All right. Have you ever had large shifts in your teaching that you had emotional reaction to? And in your chat, take about 2 or 3 minutes and give an example of a time that you had to shift in your teaching and that you had an emotional reaction to that shift, or watching an emotional reaction in other people. All right, so Sabbatha has said that she's experienced the same thing. All right, Dr. Vora said that this is a good example of major shift and that there's always an emotional reaction to change. As of now, there are resistance from parents at various levels. Ms. Pandaweep Suri said taking an online exam for 3.5 hours was so stressful. Batul said that the post-COVID world has caught me off guard, and online teaching has been stressful indeed. My friend Anna Nugent said having to record or create recorded lessons is frustrating and unsatisfying. We're going to go through 2 more. Maria Lopez said teaching small kids, it's hard, not only cognitively, but emotionally as well. And Naga said, parents watching classes and commenting on my efforts is not always the best feeling, as it were. All right, so continue to think about this. When we have to shift, it's not just a cognitive process. It's not just, do I know this new approach? Can I understand this new idea? It's also an emotional process. How am I feeling about this? How does my feeling impact my ability to execute my goals effectively? So this is a background that, even though specific to the time in COVID, is pretty much universal, generalizable to any time that we have change. Paying attention to our emotions and emotions of others is going to help us to be successful in this situation. So let's think about how we break this situation down using the skills and the abilities of emotional intelligence. Well, the first thing that we have to do is that we have to establish a goal. What is it that I'm trying to accomplish? With my own kids, when they get really frustrated, when they're getting really upset or anxious, one of the big questions I ask them is, what problem are you trying to solve right now? And by orienting people to their goals, what we do is we create a sense of ownership. We create the ability to be intentional about our actions rather than just taking information from the environment as reflected in our emotional state. So the first thing that we do when we are using the blueprint process in order to develop our emotional intelligence skills is to be intentional about setting our goals in every interaction that we do. Has anybody ever been looking for something and then looked in this same place over and over and over again because you're feeling frustrated about not having your keys and you're trying to get out to work? In this case, your emotions feeling frustrated are giving you information that you're trying to accomplish something and not able to do so. So by taking that step back and saying, I'm trying to find my keys and I'm feeling frustrated, that allows us to start problem solving rather than just using our emotional state to keep us looking for our keys in the same situation over and over again. So I can't emphasize this idea enough, that the number one step in developing our emotional intelligence abilities is to be cognizant about what we are trying to accomplish in our interactions with ourselves and others. So in this scenario, our teacher has thought about this and she's established a goal. She said, I want to remain open to teaching. I want to remain open to online teaching, training, and create new ways to engage my students in learning. So again, our emotions can come up and they're giving us information about ourselves and the environment. And when that emotion comes up, the first thing that we need to do as we're mapping that emotion is think, what am I trying to accomplish? And then we use that information, what am I trying to accomplish, as well as our ability to label our emotions, to engage in problem solving that is adaptive and meets our outcomes. Let's move on and see how our teacher does. Well, once she's established her goal, now she's going to be mapping her emotions. She wants to remain open to learning because she wants to give the best experience to her students. Now she's going to map her feelings so that she's able to understand what she's feeling in the context of the environment. What is the information that she needs to take out of this environment? Now, just like a real map, words, like pictures on a map, are representative. They're symbols of different things. So on a map, a building may be represented as a square. A road may be represented as a line. In real life, we represent our emotions through our words, feelings like anxious and worried that reflect the pleasantness and the energy that's involved in these emotional states. By doing that, we create meaning and understanding of those emotional states and allows us to navigate towards our goal. So think about it like this. When you're using a map, you usually have an end state in mind. Where is it that I'm trying to go? I've established a goal. I need to get from here to somewhere else. Although I do know some people who just like to look at maps because they love them. Most of us, when we pull out a map, it's because we're trying to get to someplace specific. So once we've established that goal, we need to then understand, well, what are the symbols that I'm feeling that give me information? What are these emotions that I have? Back in our scenario, we have a teacher, and she maps that she's feeling anxious and worried about having to take this new approach to teaching. I haven't had a chance to think about others, but I would guess my students are feeling the same way about this huge shift. Or perhaps they really don't care about any of this. So as an average level of teacher emotional intelligence, the teacher is having difficulty mapping the feelings of others, but she's able to map her feelings effectively. Anxiety and worry means that a new situation or a fear or threat is approaching. But we don't have to stop at mapping. In order to use all of our emotional intelligence abilities, we're going to move from that labeling sense, knowing where we're at, to matching. What emotions are most helpful to the situation this teacher is in? She remembers that different emotional states facilitate different kinds of thinking and motivate us in different types of ways. And so from a teacher's perspective, I read in my EI book that a small amount of anxiety can be motivating, but too much can be paralyzing. And worry can be useful as it helps us pay more attention to details. However, I'd like to bring my anxiety and worry to a level that allows me to stay open and learn. I know my emotions are contagious, and if I'm overly anxious and worried, my students will feel it as well. Realistically, I don't want them to be panicked. Ideally, I want them to feel excited about new ways of learning. So let's take a minute and go back to our chat. Has anybody felt the contagious effect of emotions? Can you give me an example of a time where either positive or negative emotions affected students' ability to learn in the classroom? A positive time where maybe high energy, positive emotions affected your students' abilities to learn, or a negative time where maybe low or high energy or negative emotions affected students' ability to learn. You can take a minute, put your ideas in the chat, and we'll review them out loud for the whole group. So Anuja said, when a teacher is angry, it's contagious and creates negativity in the class, right? So there's nothing wrong with being angry. The question is, what am I trying to accomplish with that anger? And when I understand what I'm trying to accomplish with that anger, I might think of different regulation strategies or management strategies that allow my students to be open to learning. So Naga said, both of them actually affect. When my energy as a teacher is low, I may not be encouraging to my students, right? Dr. Vora said that what one is feeling as a teacher certainly has a contagious effect on her students. It definitely impacts learning. Sabitha said when she showed pics of the school in my online classes, the students were very interested, right? So we had to think about how we match our emotional states to what we're looking to accomplish in our classrooms. If we want students to be really focused, we may create a different emotion than if we want students to be open and creative and problem solving. When Batul Ahmed says that when students feel the effort put in me to make the online class interactive, I feel the positive vibes from them, and that motivates me more. So he's talking about this circle of emotions in which he puts an effort to motivate his students, and then their motivation motivates him, which then puts that effort in to motivate his students all over again. Again, my friend Anna, I've experienced my passion for subject being inspirational students. They may not feel the passion, but they are more positive. So when we're matching emotions, we need to understand that our emotional state has an impact on how students receive information, how students remain open to learning, how students understand the importance of the material that they're engaging in. So our teacher here realizes that if she's very anxious, she's very worried about teaching online, that may create a contagious effect for her students, and they may feel like there is a threat to them. So she's going to think about how she derives meaning from her emotional state in line with her goals. What is the cause of these emotions? Remember, emotions are never wrong. They're always information. However, our interpretation of these emotions can be on point or can be a little bit off base. What we're feeling is always information. How we understand what we're feeling and why we're feeling that way, that's where emotional intelligence skills come to play, right? Where we need to be rigorous in understanding why we are feeling a certain way and how that information gives us feedback around what we're trying to accomplish in the environment. So in this case, our teacher stops and she thinks she's got an average amount. She's had some emotional intelligence training. So not only has she mapped her emotions, established her goals, thought about what she's trying to accomplish and match them, but she's also thought about what is the meaning of these things? Well, my first year of teaching from the teacher's perspective is hard enough. Well, she's a first year teacher without having to learn a whole new approach. Classroom management was never my strong suit, and I'm worried that the online approach is going to be a disaster. Unfortunately, if I focus too much on my anxiety, I won't be able to learn anything about how to do this. So you see how she's matching her emotions to her goal. She says, well, if I invest in my anxiety, then I'll be focusing on my feelings rather than using my feelings to facilitate my ability to take in new information. I know my students are struggling with not having seen their friends at school. And some have shared with me that they are feeling worried online learning just won't be the same. I know them well enough that even though they complain about school, it's also a safe place for them. And their home life can sometimes be chaotic. Maybe everything will turn out fine. So this process here at analyzing our emotions and thinking about what is in the environment and in myself that are creating these emotional states is one of the key aspects of emotional intelligence abilities. There are some who think that just because they're feeling something means that they're justified in whatever they do. Just because I've mapped my emotions and I'm feeling angry means that I can do what I want to do. In fact, understanding where that anger comes from, understanding where that anxiety is derived from, what information am I learning from that environment? And how is that aligned to what I am trying to accomplish? You can see this teacher has a clear sense that she wants to be available and open to teaching online for her students. And she's recognized that even though she sees a threat as reflected in her anxiety, her goal is not to be anxious. Her goal is to be available for learning for her student. And that goal is going to allow her to manage and move her emotions effectively. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to go into the chat for a little bit. We have a picture of a moonwalking traffic cop. Traffic cop who doesn't just do his job by pointing one direction, but actually enjoys it so much that he moonwalks. So what I want you guys to do in the chat is look at this traffic cop and explain from your own situation, have you ever had to manage multiple people coming from different directions so that nobody crashes and everything remains smooth? So I want you to think about, have you ever had to manage multiple directions at the same time so that nobody crashes and everybody remains smooth? And what did you do to do that effectively? So Alka said, I had to manage emotions when they've been unjustly fired by an authority figure. Thinking about, what are my goals? How do I take my emotions, move them effectively through a intersection space, which is what I'm trying, my goal, so that I can reach my outcomes. Let's get a couple of more so that we can think about how we've had to manage our emotions. So Nuja says, I use humor and animation. Maria says, manage parents' emotions. Multiple ability classrooms from Sabitha, absolutely, right? Students trying to access material from different places. So let's go back and understand, how do we manage emotions, just like this traffic cop on the right? Right? His goal is to make sure that traffic flows smoothly. So he's using signals and dancing to move people through an intersection that could result in a crash. So if we think about learning and the learning process, learning is an inherently emotional thing. If we are working effectively with our students and stretching their thinking effectively, students are at a frustration level that is productive for them to be motivated. The Russian psychologist Vygotsky talked about the zone of proximal development. This is the zone where students have enough skills to engage in a concept with stretch and interest, but not so much so that it becomes so frustrating and overwhelms students' ability to move forward. This is where learning occurs, at this zone of proximal development. And this is where our teacher is at. She's on the zone of proximal development. But how do we develop our skills so that she can be open to learning, even though she's frustrated, anxious, and scared about her ability to be successful? Well, from a teacher's point of view, she says, I really need to pay attention to this class. And I know that being hyper anxious will not help me stay open. Therefore, when I notice myself thinking, I'm never going to get this, I'm going to shift my thinking to, this is an opportunity to improve my skills. She's going to reappraise her thinking. Remember, we talked about cognitive reappraisal as a core concept of understanding our emotions. This is an opportunity for me to improve my skills. How can I use these in the classroom to become a better teacher? And I've mastered things like these in the past. I'm feeling optimistic I can do this too. I know my students are struggling with this change in learning, so I'll start out with how we are in this together. Maybe we can use this as an opportunity. I'm here to support them, and everything's going to be all right. So in this case, our teacher used a cognitive reappraisal strategy in which she interpreted her emotions, her anxiety, the threat that she felt as an opportunity to improve. What does this mean for us as educators? How do we understand this in terms of how our students experience learning? How do we recognize the emotional processes that go into the learning experience and manage these so that our students are at a space where they're frustrated enough to be interested and motivated, but not overly frustrated so that they've blacked out and can't access learning and new skills? Well, let's look at what happened. Remember, the first thing that she did in this scenario was that our teacher recognized that she wanted to accomplish something. And in our blueprints, in our book, we're going to teach you how to be aware of your intentionality towards the goals that you're trying to accomplish in your interactions. You can write them down beforehand. You can do it in real time. And you can do like I do with my sons and ask yourself, what problem am I trying to solve here? Which will help jumpstart your emotional intelligence skills. So having some emotional intelligence awareness reminded me how my emotions can influence my attention. By becoming aware of my mixed emotions, I was able to be cognizant of how my thoughts impacted my feelings and how my feelings impacted my behavior. Using a self-talk strategy, I became more present during the training. I took really good notes and heard information from other teachers who had done this before successfully. That left me feeling encouraged. The next day, I contacted my students and got back a few messages of relief. You notice that the teacher here is able to create a feeling of relief in her students by managing her own emotional state towards the effective outcome that she was looking to accomplish. And this also helped me calm down. So my performance anxiety was helpful, but didn't mess me up. So remember, and a bit of emotional arousal is important. A bit of negative energy can be helpful, but we always have to be in tune with what we're trying to accomplish. When that negative energy becomes so strong as to take us away from our outcome, then we need to engage in our emotional intelligence and think about how am I managing that so that I can remain focused on my goal. Let's Do a quick analysis here. Well, having reread the emotional intelligence book helped the teacher with mid-range EI skills understand how different emotions facilitate different tasks. She recognized her intense anxiety over online learning wouldn't be conducive to learning and applying new teaching strategies. Instead, she was able to map how she was feeling by paying attention to her thoughts and then shifting them to a slightly less unpleasant state to help her learn. She struggled and was not as in tune to how her students might feel and could have reflected a little bit more about how her students might react. Remember, mapping is about understanding our own emotions, also understanding the emotions of others, or labeling, I should say. And she was aware that her anxiety can be helpful as it can help focus our attention, something needed when we're learning new and difficult material. Remember, that zone of proximal development with Vygotsky. Emotional arousal focuses our attention. That teacher later used emotional connection as a strategy for moving her own students' emotions from a place of worry to a place of acceptance. Although her hopefulness is encouraging, at the same time, it may limit her awareness of future problems. Wishful thinking is something that we all engage in, but tends not to maybe be the best move strategy. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move from the emotional intelligence theory and blueprint example to question and answer. As a reflection of what we did today, we first introduced emotional intelligence theory. We talked about what intelligence is. We talked about problem space and the ability to work through problem space in order to solve problems. We reflected on the importance of moving from convergent thinking to divergent thinking. And we talked about convergent thinking as a problem with really clear answers, and divergent thinking as a type of problem with many different types of answers. And reflected on how in 2020 and moving forward, our students will have to be able to solve the types of problems that don't have clear answers in conjunction with others. Then we moved on to sustainable development goals. We recognized that at one point across the world, 90% of students were out of school. Talked about sustainability goal 4.7 and the importance of having education be able to develop the critical type of thinking skills that allow us to relate to ourselves, to others, and develop a sense of local, regional, national, and even global community. Then we went to a blueprint example. Using an example of a teacher who had to shift her instruction quickly from in-person to online, we went through the 4 steps or the 4 abilities of emotional intelligence. And we talked about the importance of identifying a goal in order to facilitate those emotional intelligence abilities of map, match, meaning, and move. Last, what we're going to do is I'm going to open up to questions. If you guys see in your bottom right hand, or bottom left hand of your screen, there are opportunities to ask questions that I can answer about emotional intelligence skills and the book that we wrote. So what I'm going to do for the last 20 minutes or so is give you guys an opportunity to think through these skills and then ask me questions about what these mean in the education context. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into our question and answering, and we're going to look at some questions that people have asked. So Bushra says, this EI quadrant does it fit to everybody or can it be customized in someone's context? As you said in the previous slide about mapping EI. So the EI quadrant, the mood map, is a general quadrant. Generally speaking, people generally have emotional skills that match to different outcomes. For you individually, what you can do is you can start to be more aware of your emotional state. You can map your emotional state on a more consistent basis and develop your skills in that area so that you have a better sense of the different emotional states that produce or are conducive to problem solving in your specific context. Again, these are generalized abilities and generalized ideas, but they generally reflect what the researcher says around different emotional states and how they help people be successful. But if you want to understand it in your own context, what I would suggest is taking time to be aware of your emotional states and how they help you facilitate problem solving. All right, so Jean Dedieu has said that sometimes physics is taken as learning by learners as a difficult subject. My question is this: how can a teacher test his or her EI in order to understand a slow learner and make him better in that subject? Well, thank you for the question, Jean. There are different types of emotional intelligence tests. The ones developed by Mayer, Salovey, and Caruso, my co-author, Mesquite. This is an ability test that measures students' ability to understand how emotions facilitate, and adults facilitate problem solving. But actually, we don't really need to measure EI to understand how a student's emotional state can help him solve problems or to accomplish difficult things like learning physics. The most important things that teachers can do in order to help students understand their emotional intelligence is be observant on how students solve problems and work through difficult things. In your example, this belief that physics is a difficult subject can be impacting your student's emotional reaction to taking physics. There may be an idea that is driving an emotional experience or a previous experience. The important thing to understand is the emotions are information. What is the information that your student is getting from their emotional state? Why? If we think about mapping and then matching, what is he trying to accomplish? And then understanding, why do I feel this way? That's going to help your student to move and to manage those emotions effectively in order to learn physics in a way that allows them to be successful. All right, so we have a question from Aram Bika. Apologies if I didn't say that effectively. Barman. So she says, how to foster emotional intelligence in an introvert child who's very shy and doesn't even mix with other kids. So again, emotional intelligence is not about being outgoing or angry or sad or shy. Emotional intelligence is about having a really good understanding of how emotion facilitates problem solving. So for your introvert child, you might want to think about helping that child be more aware of why they're feeling what they're feeling. What is the information they're getting from the environment that is causing them to feel that way? And then thinking about what emotional state do I want to be in and how do I manage myself towards that outcome? So the first question you may ask that child is, what's your goal? What is it that you want to accomplish? A lot of children, and even students with autism, who are introverted or have difficulty with social interactions, actually in real life, when you ask them, have a goal of being more socially interactive. You would assume that a student who has difficulty or student who doesn't interact with students a lot doesn't want to. But when you look at the kid and you talk to the young person, you say, well, what is it that you want to have? How is it that you want to interact? How do you want to feel? A lot of our young people, even students with autism, want to interact effectively and be socially interactive with other people. So the goal here is to step one, think about what is it that she's trying to accomplish, and then to go through our emotional intelligence skills. How is she feeling? What feelings or emotions does she need in order to match that situation? Feelings like courage, feelings like encouragement. How does she understand those feelings? And then how does she manage those feelings so that she can feel encouraged, feel powered, feel like she can move from where she is to interacting with other kids? So I hope that helps you, Amram Bika. So Batul Ahmed said, what role does a school leader play when her emotional intelligence is lower than that of the average or good teacher? How do you make her become aware of her state and teach her to map and match? If this doesn't happen, then moving forward in a conducive environment can be an uphill task. Well, Batul, I appreciate your question. It's very hard to develop emotional intelligence in others, as much as it is easier to develop emotional intelligence in ourselves. We know fields like social and emotional learning are intentional programs that teach students not only how to develop their emotional intelligence, but their social intelligence as well. When you're dealing with somebody who is a school leader, though, it's difficult to teach another person who's higher than you emotional intelligence, but I can give you some advice or some suggestions. The most important thing that we do to develop emotional intelligence for ourselves is be intentional about the skills that we use: map, match, meaning, and move. When people see us describe our emotional states or describe the states of others accurately, then they're more willing to understand and communicate with us in terms of solving problems. So what I would say is, when you're working with others who have difficulty with their emotional intelligence, one of the things that you can do is model your own emotional intelligence by mapping your own emotions, describing how your emotions are impacting the outcomes that you want to do. Talk to them about why you're feeling the way you're feeling. Be critical about your emotional state, and then talk about the regulation strategies you're using to be successful. So I hope that helps. All right, let's move on to Renu. Renu says, can emotional intelligence hamper the learning process? If yes, then how do we overcome this? Well, Renu, if you think about emotional intelligence as being able to be adaptive, right, then emotional intelligence should almost always help us learn. If we remember our original definition of intelligence, intelligence helps us to, the general ability to help us solve problems and be adaptive to the environment. So being able to understand the emotions of yourselves and others should help you to solve problems and be adaptive in the environment. When emotions become overwhelming, then it means that our emotional intelligence skills are not as developed as they could be. Once we stop solving problems and using emotional information to solve problems, that means that we have to develop our emotional intelligence skills more effectively, so that we can get back into taking the information that's given to us by our emotions in order to be adaptive, flexible, and solve problems. I hope that answered your question. All right, next question comes from Eric. Eric says, do teaching methods or teacher behavior in the class help or contribute or develop the ability of students' emotional intelligence? So the answer to your question, Eric, is absolutely. One of the most important things that teachers can do is model their own emotional intelligence. Talk about and map your own emotions. I'm feeling frustrated because. That sentence gives students an understanding of emotions and cause and effect. Not only do you label, but you also help students create meaning. You might talk about getting yourself excited about class in order to generate enthusiasm in the class, which models this idea of matching emotions to the content that you're trying to teach. And then lastly, you can be really explicit about the move and management strategies that you use, and encourage your students to use similar types of strategies that meet their own goals. Remember, managing is not about suppressing emotions. It's not about saying you shouldn't be angry. It's about facilitating your emotions in order to meet your goals. I hope that helped out. All right, let's move on to Shabna. Shabna says, expressing and discussing emotions in team meetings is a good way to foster solutions, but how do we ensure that it doesn't affect and demotivate others in the team? Well, Shabna, this is a really great question, because one of the misconceptions of emotional intelligence is that it means that we just talk about our emotions all the time. But remember what the teacher did. She didn't just talk about her emotions in terms of being anxious and worried. She thought about what was the goal that she was trying to accomplish, and what was the emotions she was trying to foster in herself and others. So I would say that expressing and discussing emotions in team meetings are good ways to find solutions, because they facilitate communication. But as a leader, also think about how am I expressing and discussing emotions are helping me meet the goal that I'm trying to accomplish. All right. So it's not just about talking about your emotions, it's about understanding how your emotions are helping you to solve problems. I hope that helps. Sunil, up to what extent can yoga practices help develop emotional intelligence? So Sunil, yoga and mindfulness practices are often a really, really good way of developing emotional awareness, being able to map your emotions. Yoga encourages us to be aware of our bodies and to be aware of what's happening inside of our bodies and inside of our minds and inside of our feelings. When we practice those skills consistently, we're better able to identify the emotions that we have in ourselves and then to activate our problem-solving skills by thinking about, what am I trying to accomplish? What's my goal? People who have ill-developed or underdeveloped emotional intelligence have a real difficult time at actually feeling and understanding what they're feeling. And the feeling goes from, what do I feel, to what do I do, without any cognitive of use in terms of thinking about what am I trying to accomplish. So Sunil, yoga is a really great tool. Mindfulness is a really great tool at being aware. And awareness is one of the most important steps in developing emotional intelligence. I hope that solved that or answered your question. All right, Amrabika. So she asks, can empathy be a first step towards emotional intelligence implementation? So Amrabika, empathy is about understanding the emotions of others. And one of the most important things to developing a sense of empathy is to be able to really understand and accurately label emotions in ourselves first, right? So one of the challenging things in terms of empathy is if we don't have a sense of what emotions are in ourselves, it's hard for other people, it's hard for us to understand what they are in other people. I'll give you an example. A student who's had a difficult life, who hasn't really felt a lot of support or love from their parents, often has difficulty identifying supportive or love in other people. They tend to see threats at a higher level than what we see with a student who has had more supports. So one of the more important things that we can do for our kids is develop their emotions by modeling it for themselves, but also by giving them a range of experiences and then giving them the words to describe those experiences so that they have the ability to make finer distinctions in their emotional state. When we've experienced different types of emotional states, we're much easier and much more likely to be able to identify those in others in order to facilitate empathy. So I hope I answered your question there. Developing your own emotional intelligence is often the first step to being able to be empathic towards others, especially the understanding skill, understanding the cause of effective emotions. All right. Oh, Bushra is saying thank you. Well, Bushra, I am happy to have the opportunity today. Yvonne, who is the most important person? Learners, teachers, leaders in the learning environment, so as to be the first to manage the emotions of each and every one. So Yvonne asked a difficult question. In the context of students or young people, the first teachers of their emotional states are going to be their parents. Their parents help young babies go from co-regulation, where parents are helping child to regulate their emotional state, to self-regulation, right? You can see as babies develop, they start from a place where they can't regulate anything. Babies start to develop intention, but they don't have the ability to actually execute on that intention. So they get frustrated often and quickly. And so what parents do to develop emotional intelligence is they start to label those feelings for young people. Oh, you're feeling frustrated. Oh, you're feeling angry. That labeling creates, or mapping, creates the intentionality so that young people understand that there's a construct, there's a frame to what they're feeling. After they construct that frame to what they're feeling, our parents then can help our young people to understand, oh, you're feeling frustrated because you stayed up all night. Then we move to our our community leaders, our teachers, everybody else in the environment who was able to support the development of emotional intelligence skills as well. They moved to then mapping, understanding, and then managing our emotions so that our young people can develop these skills to be successful. Again, the way that I do it in my house is that I work with my children, Elijah and Isaiah, to understand what is it that they are trying to accomplish. What is the goal that they're trying to seek? And the words that I use is, oh, what problem are you trying to solve? And that helps them move from an emotional state where they're just taking information about their frustration from the environment to a problem-solving state where they're taking information about frustration and then using that to understand that they're trying to accomplish a goal or solve a problem in a task. Nazish is saying, thank you for such a praiseworthy talk. I appreciate you, Nazish, and thank you for the compliment. Bindu says, some people don't show any emotion. It's hard to know what's going on inside of them. How do we tackle them? So there are different clues to people's emotional state. Remember, emotion is feedback about how we are accomplishing our goals into our environment, as well as it governs and motivates us towards accomplishing outcomes. So we all have emotional ways of communicating. It may be the way that our shoulders hang, the way that our faces hang, the way that we move. So the hardest thing about understanding people's different emotional states is that people express emotions differently, although there are some clear commonalities on your faces. The key is to know people and to study their patterns so that you start to understand how their emotions are impacting their behavior. I hope I answered your question. Zen Tang is, what are some resources and websites that are available to learn more about emotional intelligence? Well, one of the most important resources is our book, which is the Educator's Practical Guide to Emotional Intelligence. You can find it on Amazon. You could also look at the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, which is run by Dr. Mark Brackett. And that will give you some key sources around emotional intelligence. You can also look at the website of CASEL. And CASEL is looking at emotional intelligence as applied and combined with social intelligence in order to understand the process of social and emotional learning. All right, so we have time for about 2 or 3 more questions. Eric asked, how can teachers identify the emotional intelligence of a learner? And what can a teacher do to help such a learner develop his or her emotional intelligence? So again, as we talk in the book, one of the most important things that teachers can do to identify emotional intelligence of a learner is to observe how the learner solves problems. How do they approach tasks? How do they manage their own emotional state in the context of relationships with others, relationships with tasks, and relationships with you? Once you have observed your student and given them experiences that would give them opportunities to solve problems in the zone of proximal development, as per Vygotsky, then you have a sense of their ability to map emotions. How well do they use language to describe their emotional state? Match emotions. How well can they match how they're feeling to the outcome they're trying to accomplish? Identify meaning. How well do they understand causes and effects of emotions? And then regulate and move. How well do they move their emotional state in order to accomplish their goals? And then last but not least, Naga said, is EI more of an acquired skill or do genes also play a role? So Naga, EI is both an acquired skill and also reflective of genes. So genes play a role in a couple of different ways. One, they play a role because the quality of parenting is related to the quality of parents' ability to develop your young people. So genes play a role because your parents are reflective of your genes. And so the quality of parenting inputs is going to be reflective of some of your emotional intelligence of your parents. But also genes play a role in temperament, right? But remember, emotional intelligence skills are not about, am I happy or am I sad? They're not about, am I excited or am I relaxed? It's about understanding and using those concepts in order to problem solve problem solve towards our goals. So emotional intelligence skills are related to traditional intelligence outcomes. but they are about the process that we use to solve problems. All right, so let's go with one last one. G said, for students with special needs, what's the best way to help them develop emotional intelligence? So G, for each student, we're gonna have to be able to look at different aspects of their emotional intelligence skills. Again, looking at students with autism, looking at students with Down syndrome, looking at students who are classified with emotional disorders or learning disabilities, or intellectually disabled. Right. Each of these students will have different strengths and challenges in each of these emotional intelligence outcomes. One of the most important applied aspects of emotional intelligence is social and emotional learning. And the best place to look at understanding how to develop students' social and emotional learning skills is to look at the CASEL website. All right, so that's it for our question and answering. I'm going to now turn this back over to Aryan, and he is going to close this out. If you want to look to connect with us, you can connect with me at eiteacher.org.com. You can contact me at davidadams@Urban Assembly, and be sure to look me up at Twitter on dadams@Urban Assembly. Arian, I'll take it back. I'll give it back over to you to say thank you and bid our audience adieu. You're still on mute, Arian.
Thank you so much, David, for such an interesting session. I hope this session was as empowering as it was intended to be. Thank you all for participating in this session. You're here for so long till the end of the session, so it's wonderful to have you all. And you know that you're all champions of the Online Education Leadership Forum, so you're all a part of the forum. So thank you for being a part of it. Do share it with others and spread the message of the OELF platform with every educator that you know and all school leaders in your contact. Also, let us know how we can make this better through the feedback form. Let's grow this platform together. I understand that we may still have a few questions or many questions that we may not have been able to cover or answer them sufficiently through this masterclass. And we look forward to hearing from you your thoughts, ideas, suggestions on how we can empower students to be the amazing beings that they already are. So we have highlighted, and we are delighted to know more from you about what you feel about this session, and also your thoughts and ideas on fostering emotional intelligence. Do share with us your thoughts either via email or through the social network. Also, our next session is on 24th of July at 9 a.m. India time, that is GMT plus 5.5, where we'll be discussing what are the new skills and competencies our teachers need. Thank you all for sharing these amazing ideas on the OELF platform. On behalf of the foundation and everybody present here, I thank David for taking out the time from his busy schedule and sharing his beautiful insights, ideas and experiences with us. Also, once again, I thank all of you to be a part of the OELF family. I would like to see you back on the 24th of July. Thank you. See you soon. And yes, spread love and compassion. Our world needs it more. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Arian.